to Seeing Through Ancient Eyes, where I share unexpected insights about Torah, diving into the ancient Near East culture to uncover how much better our God is than any other power that we might ever want to put our hope and our trust in. I'm Gail Heaton, and if this is your first time here, I want to welcome you. And I also want to tell you that each week I present like little bite-sized pieces of ancient Near East culture that's taken from the Torah portion. And I do this because I want you to better understand the culture that the Torah was given. Because if you know what the ancients were up against, then I think that you'll get a better idea of how God met them exactly where they were at and where they needed him to. And when you can see what he's done for the ancients, I think that it's going to allow you to trust him even more to meet your own needs in our modern culture. Okay? So this week we are in the Torah portion called Toldolt, and that is translated as generations. Now, if you've been following along with me, you know that in the previous lessons, I've been talking about Abraham putting roots down into the land in a way that demonstrates his faith in God's promises throughout the generations. And so I want to continue to build on this theme of God working through the generations. So let me read Psalm 145, verses 3 through 7. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom. One generation commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts. They speak of the glorious splendor of your majesty, and I will meditate on your wonderful works. They tell of the power of your awesome works, and I will proclaim your great deeds. They celebrate your abundant goodness and joyfully sing of your righteousness. So it says, one generation commends your work or your works to another. All right. So we have one generation to another, right? God is the God of generations. You know, Exodus 3:6, he's introducing himself. He says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. So, and clearly we see that God works through the generations, right? So, you know, you and I have a mandate toward generational interactions, right? The generation that is now, that's mature now, needs to pour their faith into the generation that's younger, that's coming up, right? And that upcoming younger generation needs to learn to follow the example and the mentorship of the older generation. Now, we don't always see this in modern times, but to the ancients, this would have been more of an imperative to both train up and also to follow. It was part of their culture to pass down their heritage. I really wish that this was more of a norm in our modern culture. And I know within our modern culture, even in the United States, there are some cultures and some groups that attend more to this generational thinking. But by and large, I think we need more mentors and more examples of how to do this, both on the giving and the receiving end. So now, when we're talking about generations, of course, we're talking about individuals that make up families, right? So we're talking about family dynamics. And it's not always going to be an easy road to pass wisdom down from one generation to the other, or to receive that wisdom, right? And in fact, it can get messy pretty quickly, right? And I think that this Torah portion is actually a really good example of how messy it can get. I don't know about you, but I find it sort of oddly comforting to know that it's not just me that has participated in and witnessed family struggles, right? And so in this Torah portion, we're introduced to sibling rivalry that's kind of spoken with an ancient accent, right? Now, I am the sister to 3 siblings, and so I know that I have participated in plenty of jealous antics with my siblings. And I'm also the mother to 7 children. They're all adults now and out of the house. But I have refereed my fair share of fights between siblings. So I think, with that background, I was really interested to consider Jacob and Esau's struggles with each other that we learn about in this Torah portion. And so one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to know if their sort of warlike dynamic, which was even seen in Rebekah's womb, if that symbolized something deeper than just sibling discord. And if so, what could that teach me about myself and my relationship to other people? And so I think that when you and I see this Torah portion through ancient eyes, there's actually a lot of wisdom that we can glean about the nature of our own internal makeup. So in this Torah portion, Genesis 25:23, it says this: "The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." So, we know that Jacob and Esau were twins. And I guess I should say Esau and Jacob, right? Because Esau was the oldest. And bragging rights of twins always goes to the oldest. I know this because 2 of my sons are twins. And even now that they're like in their early 20s, the older one, and by just a few minutes, by the way, he never lets his kid brother forget that he's the one who won the birth contest. So the twins that are warring in Rebekah's womb, that can teach us that a battle rages between 2 types or 2 natures of people, as well as 2 nations, right? One is represented by Esau and the other Jacob, and they're both kind of vying for that "I win" status. And so the lives that are growing in Rebekah's womb, I think that they have a lot more to teach us because they contain these 2 opposing natures that we find that we have in ourselves. So what do I mean by that? Well, we can learn about the 2 opposing natures, the archetypes, by going back to the creation story, and specifically the story of day 6, where animals were created first, and then humankind. Okay? So I do want to say that I first learned to see this Jacob and Esau dynamic of day 6 from Dr. Halissa Aylwine of the Creation Gospel. She's a phenomenal teacher, and I highly recommend her. So Esau's the oldest, and he's described as hairy and red. And this description sort of hints at the physical appearance of a day 6 beast creature. And it emphasizes that Esau came from the earth. So in Genesis 25:25, it says, "The first to come out was red," from the Adam, from the earth, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. Now, beasts of the field were created on day 6, after their kind, right? And God said it was good. That's a positive value that I don't want you to lose sight of as we go through this lesson, okay? Genesis 1:25, God made the wild animals according to their kinds, livestock according to their kinds, all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds, and God saw that it was good. So following on Esau's heels, and that's a word pun on Jacob's name, heel grabber, is the second born, and that's Jacob, right? And then also on day 6, mankind was created after the creatures, after a different kind. Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So it was into this creature only that God breathed his ruach, his spirit, right? That divine spark that's in all of humanity, Genesis 2:7. And at the end of all of this, God, of course, says it is very good. Now, within that creation account, we learn, of course, that we humans share characteristics with other day 6 creatures, the beasts, right? So that would be our appetites, our drives, our emotions, our intellect, like our cunning, right? But we humans have something extra. We have the breath of God. So within each of us are these 2 day 6 natures, the beastly and the God-breathed, all right? Now, that's not to say that Esau, who represents the beastly, that he didn't have the divine spark of God in him. But the twins represent 2 opposing forces within humanity. Our base animalistic natures. And these natures are needed for survival. So it's good, right? They're needed for us to be able to experience those gifts that God has given us from the earth. So that's Esau, right? And then our divine spark, the part of us that reaches out for God and desires intimacy with him, that's represented by Jacob. So Rebecca felt this brawl between these 2 natures that were vying for top billing. And when we think about it this way, you and I also within ourselves have this 2 natures vying for top billing. And so the question is, which nature is going to lead in a given moment, right? So, of course, of the twins, each brother had to decide what nature would rule or lead, as well as us. Now, for Esau, his animal nature ruled most of the time. And for Jacob, his image of God nature ruled most of the time. Now, it's interesting. Later, Jacob is renamed Israel by God. And then throughout the scriptures, he's sometimes referred to as Jacob and sometimes referred to as Israel. There's a number of different reasons why this. One of them can be that it represents Jacob's constant struggle within himself of these 2 natures. Like which one is going to master in that particular moment. So from an ancient Near East standpoint, Esau, the boy with like the ruddy complexion, he would have been favored, judged favorably. He would have had been seen to have almost like a heroic countenance. And then when you think of the characteristics of Esau, how he's described in Torah, he was described as a cunning hunter, right? A man of the field. Hunters use their intellect to snare their prey. Field is a metaphor for the world. So Esau's traits were highly esteemed in the ancient Near East. And those kind of traits are going to be, even now, today, esteemed in the eyes of the world, right? So Esau actually represented the ideal ancient Near East firstborn to carry on the family name, the one to give the birthright and the special blessings to. And that's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. What was the birthright and what were the special blessings? But the question is, was Esau ideal for God's kingdom that is kind of upside down from the kingdoms of the world? So I want to show you these 2 things that firstborns received in the ancient Near East. And then we will look at what Esau thought of his apparent legacy. Okay, so we're going to go on an ancient Near East dive into the birthright of the firstborn and the blessing of the firstborn. I want to give credit to and gratitude to Rico Cortez of Wisdom and Torah Ministries. Was my first teacher on this subject. Wisdom and Torah Ministries.com, I think. So, let's talk about the birthright first. In Hebrew, it's called Bakora, and this includes physical wealth and inheritance of the household, headship of the house, and in the ancient Near East, this was essentially high priest of the family, and the honor of taking care of the parents as they aged and then bearing them. It was a great honor. And this was given the wealth and the inheritance, material possessions. It was given in greater measure to the firstborn than it would be to the other children of the father. The purpose being using that wealth to carry out the duties and the responsibilities of being leader in even the extended family. So greater resources were needed for these greater responsibilities. Now, in the case of Abraham's family, the Bakora had spiritual aspects as well, and these were taken very seriously. So for one, it was incumbent upon the one that received the Bakora that they represent the family well. So in this case, I mean, that was true throughout all families, but in Abraham's case, this would be representing the family well as image bearers of the God of Abraham, the one from whom those promises came, right? So Abraham had this perpetual covenant with God. All the nations of the earth would be blessed, and Abraham would have numerous descendants. The land would be given as a perpetual possession, and Abraham would teach his children and household to follow the ways of God in righteousness and justice. So this Bakora, this birthright, was expected to pass from Abraham to the eldest son according to the ancient custom. And in passing this down, God's honor is preserved when his image bearers do justice and righteousness. So the spiritual inheritance was of utmost importance to this family. So it was expected to go to Esau, privileging the firstborn son. That wasn't universally practiced in the ancient Near East, but it was kind of the default position. It was usually expected. And so, of course, we learned that Esau despised the Bakora that goes to the firstborn. Why? Well, day 6 beast creatures, they kind of think in the here and now with little forethought to the future, right? Now, that isn't in and of itself a sin, but that kind of thinking can lead to some wrong actions that are sins, and we see that with Esau. So there is an ancient midrash that tells the story about that lentil stew that Jacob cooked, that it was a traditional meal for mourners. It was meant for Isaac, who was mourning the death of his father Abraham. And the Midrash tells the story that when Esau learned that Abraham had died, he concluded there was no resurrection, therefore no afterlife that he would have consequences, he would be punished in. And he took that as a sign to sin all that he wanted to. Now, this Midrash, this story, was probably drawn from the extra-biblical book of Yasher. 27:4 is the reference. And we talked earlier about extra-biblical texts, how they can shed light on what the ancients thought, and so there's value in reading them and knowing what the contents, even if we're not going to hold those stories in the same light as Scripture, right? So in the book of Yasher, it details that Esau came back just famished and weary because he was out murdering. Specifically, the murder he's said to have killed Nimrod. And then, the idea there's no afterlife, and so Esau incorrectly assumed and reasoned that therefore there's no reason for this birthright, this Bakora, with all the responsibilities that were in this world. So Esau despised his Bakora, that base animalistic nature of his, which is good for survival in the here and now, that took over. So, as the story goes, a pile of lentils today he thought was better than this promised hope in the world to come. And then we can see another way that Esau disqualified himself from the firstborn status, the Bakora. That was when he married the daughters of Canaan. Remember, that was from Genesis 26:34. In the ancient Near East culture, that would have been a huge dishonor to the whole family. And it would have been a sign that Esau really didn't have any interest in the most important parts of the Bakora. So the next thing we'll talk about from an ancient Near East perspective is the blessing for the firstborn. And a blessing, in Hebrew it's called bracha. That's given by a father that is prophesying the personal destiny of his sons. And this blessing isn't given just to the firstborn, but the one who has the birthright does usually get a double blessing in this as well, which includes worldly possessions. So the father's blessing, that represents a special place of favor in the father's eyes. And this place of favor was a bigger deal in the ancient Near East than we probably imagine, because the ancient Near East was a honor and shame culture. So acquiring goods and money and wealth, that could be a means to obtain an honorable name, right? So the blessing that Isaac prayed over, this is the blessing that Isaac prayed over Jacob, who he thought was Esau. Okay, so we kind of want to separate the two things that we're talking about. Now, it appears that Isaac gave to Jacob, instead of Esau, the blessing, not the birthright. Okay, because the wording doesn't have the promise of descendants who will become a set-apart nation, and you all the nations will be blessed, which was handed down from Abraham to Isaac. So Esau, when he learned that this blessing was given to Jacob instead, he wails, well, do you have a blessing for me too? And at this point, the Bakora, the birthright, hadn't been given. Okay? So there's that distinction of the two. Now, Genesis 27:34, 36, 38. The wording there indicates that Esau's cry was this loud, bitter wail that comes from this man who let his animal instincts rule his God image side. Now, Esau might not have wanted the spiritual blessings, nor the responsibilities that were inherent in the firstborn birthright, but because of the culture, it's most likely that he would have felt greatly shamed when he thought that he'd been passed over for all blessings completely. So when he didn't get what he wanted, those earthly possessions, that would have been a great dishonor. And he didn't get that because he didn't submit his beast nature to the breath of God. So from these biblical twins, we can learn that none of us is immune to the identity crisis that's typified by these twins. These two natures in Judaism, one is called Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, Esau, and the other is Yetzer Hatov, positive inclination, Jacob. Those twins that are in each of us. Now, it's our job to transform the evil inclination into a force for good. So when we do that, even that so-called evil inclination, the animalistic nature, it's tov, it's good, because it fits God's purpose, right? Now, it's true that these two natures of ours can point us down different roads that we can take at any given moment, depending on which nature is in charge, right? So one thing that we can learn from this lesson is that there's always that question before us, which nature is in charge right now? So may you and I choose the nature and the path that propels us to rise to the call of the faith of Abraham and his seed after him, where we can stand outside of our day 6 animal desires, which serve a purpose, right? But instead, in a given moment, choose to lead with that divine breath that's in us. And God's free will gives us this choice. So may we never be deceived that we're stuck as a beast. We're stuck in our survival nature. We're not. And I'm thankful that God has allowed us to choose, and that in Messiah, it's like our bets are hedged toward the divine. And I'm thankful that God's just a breath away. The nearness of God, him being just a breath away, that's what we're going to be uncovering in next week's Torah portion. I'm going to be exploring Joseph's encounter with God, in that place where he didn't expect God to be. So stay tuned for next week, because I think you're going to be in for a treat with that Torah portion when you look at it through ancient eyes. I can't wait. So until next week, be blessed.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.